similar to last time you were with us.
It looks like it. I know.
On non-federal awards, we did part one already with proposal, pre-award stuff. And this is like, we're transitioning from that pre-award to post-award. We're gonna see financial stuff. Who do you have with you today? You have me, Catherine O'Hare, Training and Information Coordinator with OSP. Shannon and I were talking about experience years, and I can't remember now. I think I hit 15 because I got to start young, and started in a department, as a student hire. So I've been in astrophysics for a little while, and I found my way into Central and did a lot of grants and negotiations and acceptance. So that's a lot of my experiences that you'll hear about today. And then I did some work on the DRA side, supporting arts and sciences. So that's where I also found other Wildcards. Shannon, you're next on my list. Do you want to say hi?
Sure. Shannon Irie, also Training and Information Coordinator. Spent the first 14 years plus out in the department. I had the pleasure of having a couple of PIs that were very heavy in industry relationships and also in the award and proposal stage. And now I've been with OSP for the last 3+. So I just celebrated my 18th anniversary last week.
Nice.
At CSU. So there we go.
All right, so I'm Michael Lang. I am the SRA for Team 6 currently. I have spent about half my life in industry and about half my life working for universities. I've worked for WSU in a Washington State University, in a post-award central role. And then I worked for a number of years here in CBMBS and MIP, which is microbiology, immunology, and pathology, as a DRA role, pre and post award, cradle to grave kind of stuff. And then I moved over to OSP a few years ago after COVID and have been there since then doing Team 6. And we have a lot of state and non-federal awards in our portfolio.
We have some wildcard characteristics we'll throw at you, some examples. You'll see examples on the slide. Sometimes we will mention the specific sponsor, and sometimes we will let them remain anonymous. And we'll just let you know their field or something, or if it's a foundation, so you can know what to be looking out for. Some related delays in this award stage, and then some resources. Barry did the proposal cards, and so this is just letting you know we're going into award management, financials, and then our skip and reverses and pick up 2 or 4 cards. So I said this is like the transition from pre-award to post-award. How do we know that we're in an award? Maybe. Maybe we receive award, maybe we don't. So this is one of our funny examples of, is the check the award? Is that all we're getting? Do we get an email that's like, congrats? Is it just a letter of intent? Or is it an actual award?
Right, yeah, I think we get all across the board here. Sometimes our partners will send us a nice notice of award, an actual agreement to review with lots of terms and conditions, just almost the same way you'd see stuff with the federal government. Other times, like you said, the only thing we get is an email notification with a smaller foundation. Industry can be quite confusing because they're used to buying services. They don't understand that we have a process that we have to follow here. My most recent example that I'll jump right into is Company X. I was forwarded an email chain. During the email chain, it said, hey, I think we dropped the ball and didn't send payment. And I was like, payment for what? For who? What's going on? Went back, did some research, and followed this email chain back months. It turned out we had sent a proposal into Company X. They had agreed to fund it to the PI. OSP had never been involved after we reviewed the proposal. And then our PI did all the work and sent in the results, and the company didn't pay us initially, and then they sent over a check. And we have no agreement for this award. We have no terms and conditions to follow. So I broached the subject with the sponsor of like, hey, can we get an agreement so I can create an account and we can put charges on it? And they're like, oh, we already have a master agreement. So then I went back and looked, and sure enough, we had a master agreement from 8.5 years ago. It expires in another 1.5 years from now. So we're still under there, but we issued task orders under this. So I'm like, do you want me to generate the task order? It's pretty simple. I can do so. And the person was traveling with the sponsor and said, I'll get back to it when I get home. I've followed up 3 or 4 times over the past 1.5 months. They basically just stopped communicating because they've got the results and they paid, and they don't really want to deal with signing an official agreement, even if it would fit nicely under our master. So in this case, I haven't quite got to a resolution yet, but we have the money and we've done the work. But this is why it's really important to involve sponsor programs and not do any work until you get a 5.3 account and you know that there's an agreement in place. So this is part of educating our faculty and our PIs, and also making sure the department people that work with them understand that we need to wait for the work until we actually have an agreement, because now we have no reason to get a signed agreement from the sponsor because they already have what they want.
And we already have their money, so what?
And we do have their money, so I don't see what their issue is, but it's also, we might not have gotten the money. We might have done the work, and there might be problems that go south, which we're unprotected because we don't actually have a signed agreement.
Yeah.
So.
And you said like, what about all the other things that could be tied to this? The intellectual property, the other expectations, there's nothing outlined. And we'll get into some of those, but.
Yeah, I mean, we gave them the results, which could include intellectual property that we may or may not. This was a small one, so we don't have a lot of IP to be concerned about. But if we start giving out results, then we can't control something that might have value. We don't protect ourselves. And there's just, normally we like to make sure that they're protected as well, because they're giving us money for some research usually. And so it's beneficial to both of us to kind of line out what we're going to give them and for how much and what they're going to get.
Are you all familiar with master agreements? I know that I didn't get to see, like, I haven't managed them, so I thought this was an interesting example. You may have heard the acronym MRDA, and so that's Master Research Development Agreement.
Right.
Some questions to think about if you have a master agreement with a group that you want to work with. Are multiple PIs involved? Are there multiple tasks? What is the timeline for this? It can be very broad. You said this one's like a 10-year contract, basically.
Yeah, it's a 10-year one. It was signed by somebody who was out of OSP before I ever joined. So it's pretty dated. And they can run for 10 years. They can be auto renewing. They can have to be signed again. Sometimes we would prefer to renegotiate them, especially if there's F&A rate or IDC rate explicitly stated in our exchanges. So we need to keep that kind of stuff updated. You'll see them called MRDAs, Master Research Development Agreements, sometimes just a Master Research Agreement. They drop the development part. Yeah. We have a number of them. We typically don't do a Master Research Agreement unless we're doing multiple kind of task orders under it a year. If we're just doing the occasional work like this one, this would be only the second task order in 10 years. There's no reason for us to have a master for this. We could have just done one-off agreements.
Yeah.
And then your PI sometimes might get excited by getting a master agreement. But if we have a template that works and we have an agreement that's signed as a standard one-off agreement, we can usually just duplicate that easily to do another project with them versus doing a master with task orders. So sometimes I think master agreements are a little overrated, and the faculty sometimes love them, whereas they're not as much use and more work than they might realize.
So you're not coming with a high recommendation of them?
I'm not in love with them. They work in certain situations and they're advantageous, but yeah, I mean, they can go over a big period. And you mentioned the multiple PIs. We've seen situations where the master is tailored for one unit, one PI, and the company doesn't seem to understand that we have other units that may operate differently, and the PI that's on the master may not want some other PI and some other unit to be under their master because their name is on this agreement, and if something goes wrong, they have no control over it. So some of the masters, most of the masters are with CSU. Some of the masters are specifically tailored to certain entities, although that's kind of rare. So yeah, the master agreement can be all over the board.
Does anyone out there have any experience with the master agreement?
Liza's the only one that jumped on so far.
You see? Yep.
Engineering.
Yep. I had one as well. And one of the problems that we had is that they wanted to put every task under the moon under it, whether or not it fit or not. Which is also a problem because the master agreement is still tailored towards kind of a specific science. So not everything necessarily fits under it just because it is for one particular industry partner or business partner. So that's also the other problem. And it doesn't mean that we don't have to still negotiate and look at things. And I think that that's sometimes people's expectation is like, oh, well, we already have an agreement in place, so we can just, send you a check.
Right.
And that's not really how that works. So we still have to look at everything. We still have to have a proposal. We still have to have a budget for that task. So all the things that we have to do for just a normal proposal, and normal is a bad word, but for a standard proposal, we still need for an MRD or an MRA. So, okay, we have a comment. We have had master agreements with several industry sponsors. The agreements are tailored for one lab with multiple PIs. We have found them very helpful with the larger companies, which we do multiple studies with.
So that's
Yes.
one recommendation.
Yeah, and they can be. They can, obviously, some of those terms and conditions, you can get ironed out, those like sticky ones. You can get ironed out ahead of time. But again, we still need all the pieces ahead of time rather than your PIs or anyone believing that, we have this already negotiated and ready to go, so we can just do whatever we need to. So just to keep in mind.
Yeah, we want to protect the university, not put ourselves at risk.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example where it's tailored for one lab with multiple PIs.
Yep.
So it makes sense to issue those.
The previous slide, though, we kind of skipped past it a little bit. Has anyone else ever had a check just arrive?
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah, and if you had a check that had just arrived to the PI
Yeah.
or to the unit, and then you email OSP and ask, what do I do with the check?
Yeah.
Because we get that all the time, and sometimes that's the first we know of the award as well.
I did.
I mean, yes, it as well.
Yes. My PI, at least he consulted me to begin with. And we had kind of said, if we wanted to do this work, how much would it cost? And so I had helped him with some budgeting. We put together some numbers. And then it just kind of sat there. And then it sat there. And then it sat there. It sat there longer. 2 years later, we ended up with a check in the mail from this industry person. Basically it's like, okay, we're ready to do this now. And we had to have a consult. It's like, okay, well, we created a budget 2 years ago. Everything's different now. We have different salary costs, we have different fringe, we have different indirect cost rates, because at that point in time we had
The transition.
an escalation in our indirect cost. And so, it was a conversation at that point in time, and, they just sent the check without any correspondence in between. They hadn't even emailed the PI. We just ended up with a check. So we have to be really careful about the PIs going and having these conversations and giving any budgetary information. I learned my lesson. But, I did create a proposal record. I did everything. I was just waiting to hit the button for a proposal that they said they wanted to move forward. And that just didn't happen. So these things can happen because they just don't understand how we do business.
We have a few other financial thoughts later. But this also reminds me, like, who is the check going to? It's not going directly to the PI usually. It's going to the university as the representative. Like,
It can also be made up to the PI sometimes.
yeah, and that would be, how are we going to account for it differently? It's our slide later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, making sure it's getting to the right place. All this is about communication. If you have piecemeal coming to you and some email is sent to the unit that's doing the technical work, and something is sent to OSP, and something is sent in the mail, and you're like, how do I put all these together? Sometimes we have to literally smush it all together and make one big award document, so that things are in one place. Because when they are separate, then you are not in compliance, right? And that can mean something different being in non-federal world as opposed to federal, but there's still that chance, right? That a lawsuit could happen if you're not meeting someone's expectations. So for instance, the examples I put on the screen, were from American Heart Association. When they sent us a payment schedule that wasn't part of the award document, it was just a nice little tidbit added in the communication. So I said, can we reconcile these to be in one place, instead of separate? Or if you get a mod in an email and they say no other documentation will be sent, well, are we going to put that modification in the system? Yes, we want to make sure that we're on the same page and everything is known to all the parties. So that's why we're going to share it and have it documented in quality. We want to be clear, not think that there are additional things looming out there. Oh yeah, so don't agree if we hear that the research team, the PI, were talking to the sponsor and they said, yep, I said that was good to go. And it's like, wait, what did you agree to? Because we can't be agreeing to other terms and conditions in email or via phone. We need to make sure things are in documentation, in writing, and that it's saved down, for everyone's records. And if they're signing off, well, that's a separate thing. Signing off, I have in a few slides, but the right person needs to be signing. That second one about carryover is we don't see carryover restrictions often. And they just threw this into an email that only a little portion of our annual budget could be carried over to the next period. And I know I'm breaking the rule by saying this, but this was a federal flow down from a university. But it wasn't a federal term that they need to flow down. There was no higher level sponsor that needed this restriction. It was something that this institution decided to add on to us for some reason, that we could only carry over a small amount from each year. And it was very difficult to get them to agree to put it in the fully signed agreement because it was just, again, a little floating island in email instead of being a part of the actual agreed to and signed award document. That also relates to our terms and conditions. Making sure that we have a record of them and that they are saved somewhere. If it's just a web link, what if that web link is taken down, or what if it's updated? What if they send us a thing saying, by the way, we're doing our annual update of terms and conditions, and that's what we're gonna adhere to, right? If we have a federal award, we go by what is the last agreed to, like, the last
The terms
increment
and
received.
conditions
Yes.
before we receive the award.
So maybe you're going off some RTCs, research terms and conditions from 2023, because you haven't received any updates, or 2024. But if you get this from, what was this one? I think it was this Simon's Foundation or something. Yeah, Simon. Then do we need to create our own award every year when they issue their annual terms and conditions and update? If they only send us an email, we have to apply it to all the awards that we have from them. Yeah, hunting and pecking for terms and conditions.
Yeah, I would say this is where it's really nice to make sure OSP is looped in before we're agreeing to anything. So we can try to navigate these potholes and avoid them ahead of time, because you'll see, I think there was an example ago about some more onerous reporting requirements on invoices. We've seen a slight uptick, I think, in sponsors asking for receipts and timesheets and higher level of detail on invoices, which we would prefer to negotiate out. Because one, we don't have access to it. Plus it's really, really just a pain to have to do this. We will agree to spot audits and they want to come look at the books and see stuff, but every month having to send in receipts for purchases is kind of crazy, especially for some of these sponsors, and they don't have it in the terms and conditions, but later they try to add it or ask for it, which is also why it's nice to spell out in an actual agreement versus just an email saying you got an award, is so we can see what we actually have to send in on invoice and we can fight against it if we don't want to do it. So if we're all on the same page ahead of time, it's easier. And this is particularly important for the units, because if there are extra reporting requirements like receipts, that is on the department to gather those. So let's try to avoid that ahead of time. And if not, we know we need to do it so we can kind of set up that process before we send in the first invoice to the sponsor.
Okay, what happens when we only have one point of contact? If the system only allows one person to submit and submit the proposal and submit prior approvals and submit invoices and whatever else.
And what if that person isn't in sponsored programs?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if that one point of contact is only the PI? That happens. I mean, some of these guys have their own systems, right? And then you're, I don't want to say at the mercy, that sounds horrible, but then you have to wait on someone this isn't their normal job or their normal thing that they're doing on a regular basis to go in and download documents, go in and, put in reports of some sort. So just saying that we need to know ahead of time so that we can work this out and figure out if there's some way that we can make those changes in their system, add somebody differently than the PI potentially. So, yeah.
Like I say, a lot of times we can work with this. It's just nice if we know, and
Yeah.
that way, if the PI is going to submit and accept the award in the system, then they can print a PDF and send it over and we can see it just in case we need to. Make sure we give clearance ahead of time, and then also make sure that they know to pass on that award document, because there's certainly been cases where the PI is like, oh, we got this an award. And it's like, well, you got the award. The rest of us didn't see it yet. So that will explain why you don't have a 5.3 account yet. So if the PI knows to send it to us, and that's just part of making sure they understand. And I would rather the PI and the pre-award person both send me the email, even if I already have the award, just to be safe, because I can always delete the email, but if I don't get it, we can't set up an account.
Yeah, and assumptions. Don't make assumptions that OSP is involved or looped in at all stages, because on the federal side, generally we are. Still don't make the assumption though.
Right.
Don't make that assumption. But on these other types of sponsors, that's not always the case. So don't make any assumptions about who's getting the documentation or who's being lumped in to any sort of communications.
And sometimes there's some acceptance language in these portals that you're agreeing to things when you accept the award. So it's always good to know, but it's a little bit riskier when we can't see everything and there aren't multiple eyes on it.
Yeah. So this line is American Sociological Association. It's a doctoral program. I think this is a several-year-old example, but I kept it because it literally asked for the grant agreement to be accepted in the system. And I think at that time, only the PI had access to the system, and we don't want our PIs accepting on behalf of the university. That's not their role. So we need an authorized organizational representative to be doing acceptance. And I think systems are a lot better now. We also used to have this problem with like Proposal Central, where only the person submitting the proposal was the one that got the award. And I had 1 year where that person got a new job and they had moved on to a new role. So happy for them. But then we did not know when July came around that there were 9 awards pending out there until one of the PIs was finally contacted and they're like, are you guys gonna accept this? Because we need to move forward. And so we had to go in and figure out how to add in more people. And so yeah, Proposal Central has improved in the last few years. But also a lot of those sponsors sometimes change and are in different portals now. But this is just as an example. So I don't know if you will currently see this with this sponsor ASA. But yes, make sure that the person agreeing and accepting is the authorized representative within OSP. Ooh, foreign entities. I have not had a lot of these. This is all you.
This is mine. So foreign entities can be a little problematic, of course, because we'll start off with, we'll talk about the language. I had agreement a few years ago that was from the Netherlands and it was in Dutch.
And you speak Dutch?
Not at all, not even a word. The PI did, thankfully, but no, they sent us an agreement in Dutch and I could look at the tables and I could do the conversion factor to US dollars. But it was really hard to review the agreement. So they provided us an English translated version, but the Dutch version was the prevailing document. So if there was any discrepancy in the translation, like say maybe you will do this or you can do this, then the Dutch version was the one that we had to go by. They also restricted us to courts in the European Union versus our courts. And so litigating a matter that if anything comes up, we always hope it doesn't, but if something did, litigating in a foreign country can be much more cost prohibitive. So we have to get the department, and the department had to give us approval in writing that they will be willing to pay the extra litigation fees if we have to go over there. And so that was a little bit of an issue. There's the conversion factor. A lot of times these agreements are in foreign currency. While we prefer them to be in US dollars, and we will try that in the agreement, it doesn't always work. And so if the conversion changes over time, we might end up short of funds. So that's something else you have to be aware of, is that as the money comes in, it may not be the same amount. It might have been originally budgeted for $100,000. And then due to currency fluctuations, we might only get 85,000. And so they're not beholden to increase the money if the agreement's in the foreign currency. So all of these things can make foreign entities a little bit riskier to work with, but we still work with them a lot. We have a question. Sure. Liza, what do you want? Liza's one of my people, so I can say.
Curious. We get department head approval based on, if there's a litigation location kind of thing. I get that. What is there things that we do during negotiations as far as getting approval for another account, another 5-3 account to account for any budget shortfall based on conversion of foreign currency? That's just
No, we just typically ask them to play it safe, and to kind of try to hold a little bit of reserve until the end, and we see how we do. Because there's nothing else we can do about it if we don't have the money coming in, because we agreed to do it in whatever dollars that they were providing. So we're kind of stuck in that situation. Now, that said, if we can get upfront money, if we can kind of front load it before currency could fluctuate a ton over a 5 or 7 or 10-year period, that would be good. And we'll be able to know as we go along for cost reimbursable, right? So we'll know if we're sending an invoice in for $15,000 and we're only getting 12,000 US dollars back. And in that case, we need to start being proactive in handling that. But typically, it's just up to the department to trim some cost if they can.
Do we usually get a big hit, or it kind of washes out, if you will?
It can go both ways.
Okay.
It only typically pops up and is a concern, though, when we're on the negative side of that. So
Absolutely.
I don't care when we're getting more.
yeah, we don't care when we're getting more money. That's fine. When we get shorter money, it's an issue. And it doesn't happen a ton, but we have seen it happen. And so if we're working with a foreign entity, especially a foreign company, and we can front load those charges or get more money up front, so we know actually what it's going to really be, that's easier. But the Dutch example I have, I think, is at least 7 years. So who knows where we're going to end up in the end of this.
So when there's shorter periods of performance, do you try to get the money up front then versus cost reimbursable for, I can see that because of longer periods of performance.
Right. I mean, I typically would, or like I said, the first step is to try to get it into, this is the agreement for the money in US dollars. And it's very important because you want to put down US dollars. I think, does it come up later if we talk about that? But you want it in US dollars if we can. That's the first stage. And the second stage is maybe get the money up front in a lump sum.
Okay.
And even if they hold on to a retainer of like 10% for the end, that's fine, because that is less at risk. If it's only 10%, it could be at the mercy of currency fluctuations.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Our last thoughts are governing law. Can we accept any? You said it was, if we had to go to litigation, it would be with
Could
the
be more.
EU.
Yeah, it could be in their
There's some
courts.
states we can't even accept.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's one thing if we have to go up to Cheyenne to go to court. It's another thing if we have to go over to Prague or to London. And so, yeah, I mean, I haven't seen any we haven't been able to accept, but then of course, we're also mainly dealing with countries that we work with a decent amount anyway. And so we just try not to, or we stay silent on law. So if they want to sue us, they have to come over here. And then we will know if we want to go to litigate something in their courts. We already understand it's going to cost more. And that way we can make the decision whether it's worth it or not to pursue litigation in their court.
And can we work with every country out there?
No, I mean, obviously there's some countries that we cannot work with. So if your PI is trying to work with somebody that we're banned from working with, let's just avoid that situation and not try that.
And if they're high risk, we have secure and global research that we partner with.
Well, I'm pretty sure, and guys, it's been a few years, but if we're working with certain foreign companies, et cetera, I think everything has to be vetted through SGR to begin with.
Yeah.
And at the pre-award stage. So if there's anything that's kind of risky, it has to get sign off at export control, which is also another really good reason why we need to have all of these done ahead of time and done in the proper order, as opposed to just ending up with an award or having anyone just say, hey, we're going to do this. Because we have to look at those, especially if there's somebody risky. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that Michael's talking about, these currency fluctuations. And if at the end we have a currency fluctuation because the award came in the foreign dollars or foreign money currency, not dollars, get that out of your head, the foreign currency, all of those are going to have to be covered by your department. These are not costs that are covered by any centralized pool. So the risk is on the units and is on the departments and units. And I found that out the hard way with an agreement with the Canadian sponsor. When we proposed what we just put in as dollars, instead of saying US dollars, when we went to go pay that final invoice, because it was like less than a year statement of work or work that we were doing. And we went to go put in that final invoice and we invoiced them and they sent it back to us in Canadian dollars, which most of Canadian dollars are probably around, 70 to 80 cents on the US dollar. So when they were questioned why they hadn't paid our entire invoice, they're like, well, we did. We paid you in Canadian dollars. So that excess, that 20% that we ended up with, we had to cover on department funds or on other funds that were, I think my PI at the time had a startup account. So just remember risk also with these type of entities.
Lots of little ones on that foreign card.
Yeah.
This is literally a signature screen clip from an award document that I saw many years ago. It's like they Frankensteined it together. Because it's all these different funds and they're asking for everyone under the sun to sign it.
I'm still not sure who signs which blank necessarily because there's
Yeah.
two recipients. But yeah, we'll see some of these things.
Yeah, then, so sometimes we're like, if it asks for a PI to sign, for instance, do they really need to? We want to protect our PIs, or our research teams, our sponsor program teams. So making sure that the right people are signing, or getting maybe even a signature on here, like an NA, that one doesn't matter. Let's take it out. The only time I had a PI actually sign off on something was when they had to do field work in a national park. It was like in Chautauqua or something. And because there was owl nesting going on, they said, we need you to sign that you are going to not go in this area and that you will respect the park. And I was like, okay, that is literally something that is just for them. But otherwise, the university is the one signing on, to protect the university and our teams.
Yeah, all signatures should go through OSP for the most part. I mean, obviously, there's some other people in the university that can sign, but the PI should not be trying to sign agreements unless, like you said, there's an occasional agreement with an extra blank for the PI to sign, depending on what they're doing, if they have certain confidentiality or HIPAA stuff, but nearly everything goes through OSP.
Well, another example we talked about earlier was on signatures and a little bit different, is that sometimes in particular, these foreign entities might require a signature from somebody that we don't necessarily normally have sign our agreements, or they may need wet signatures They may need a stamp. We've had someone who wanted a stamp that we had to go to the provost office or to the president's office to get once. Because they have very different rules about how things are bound. So that can also cause obviously delays at the award stage.
When you have to send back wet signatures and triplicate and have them notarized, it's a little bit more work to get those done.
Yeah, the weirdest one was the stamp. And we didn't even know we had one at the university and found out that, yes, apparently CSU does have a stamp, an actual stamp, but it's at the president's office. And it needed that in order to be bound. I think it was an African country that was requiring it. The thing about these is that you may only see this once. It may only happen one time. So it's hard to say you need to look out for this every single time on every single agreement. But the more you hear about the kind of things that could pop up, I think that it makes you aware and makes you just start looking a little bit more closely at things. So if anyone has any good examples of things that they've had to help provide or have seen, we'd love to hear it in the chat.
One of the variations we get is this actually a sponsored award? Are there any strings attached? And industry and foundation relations accept it instead? Because sometimes it comes in to OSP first or the department first, and sometimes it goes to our foundation counterpart first. And we have to have that communication going to make sure the right party is managing it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when they come in and they actually want something in return, it's probably not a gift. It's more of a grant because a gift doesn't have strings attached as the picture is indicating here, right? Like if there's strings, it probably is going to flow through OSP to some degree. Because we have to give something back to them or sorry, we have to provide a deliverable. If it's just a straight up gift, it might go into a 64 account and there'll be less oversight. So, and you'll see a lot of foundations say, oh, here's your gift, but they want to report at the end. And so it may go through the foundation through OSP, but just make us aware and look us in early so we can get the determination correct.
Yeah, there may be less standardized language. They can use the word gift and mean it as a grant, for instance, or contract, whatever. We even see variation on the federal side, but I think specifically with our non-federal sponsors, you have a different lingo going on. Yeah, make sure if there's compliance stuff related, like human or animal subjects, can we ever accept as gift?
I mean, it's going to have to come through OSP if there are compliance issues. Because that's the only way to track them and make sure it's done correctly. So it still may go through the foundation to start with, and they may work with the sponsor, especially with certain sponsors that they want to handle. But it'll go through OSP in the end.
And like we said last time, there was a RAM symposium session on foundation. So if you want more on that, go pull it up on our website. Okay, this was a funny one I got. Who was the sponsor? I don't know if I wrote down this one. I think it was some philanthropic, like private group out of Boulder. And they just said, we expect this to be done in fall 2025, which, okay, yeah, that's, I guess, the semester. Oh, I changed the year on this one, but, yeah, they just gave fall. When is fall? We need a date in our system, for reporting purposes. Like, that's one of our pieces, that working with the institution and having a system in place, for our compliance aspects. Like, our university sponsored programs mainly receive federal dollars, as we talked about in the last session. And so a lot of our borders that we've built and systems are geared towards that compliance level. And so it's hard for us to just put into the system fall, something big, yeah, fall.
September 21st.
Yeah, that would be helpful. It would be specific.
Yeah, sometimes we'll end up going with the dates that align with our semesters,
Yeah.
but it's nice if we actually have a real date.
Mhm.
And I know we've talked about a start date as well. Some of the agreements have an actual start date, some are upon last signature. And that's fine as some are executed upon last signature, but the start date is earlier. So it's always nice if we have an actual definite start and end date so we can work with that. Although some of the smaller entities and foundations in particular just give us the money and say, this is for 2025, or this is to cover the summer. And we can work with it, but it's not the best. I would prefer to have a real date.
I think I had one time where we then had an extension request come in and, cause this is like a grad student's first award, for instance. And they said, I need to extend this by a few months. And when I sent the request for extension to the sponsor, they're like, we don't care. Yeah, it's your money now. Like, go to it. So it felt more like fixed price, but they hadn't specifically stated that in the agreement. So we wanted to make sure that we were following our processes and that we were safe. And an extension may not even be allowed. They may not, they may want you, in the non-federal, they may not have prior approval ideas of like that you can request a change in PI, a change in scope, a change in period of performance.
And this also becomes an issue, and again, it's an issue across the board right now anyways, but if we're looking at risk accounts, in particular for these type of sponsors, right now, at-risk accounts are kind of not liking them in general at the moment. But for these type of sponsors, they're particularly risky. And if you don't know that the start date's going to be with the last final signature, you know, you could be thinking, oh, we're gonna have some time before that, or it's gonna start if there's not an actual date. Again, if you spend any money on that, it's going to now then have to be moved on to a non-sponsored account. So the risk involved for doing at-risk on these type of accounts is also much higher.
Right.
In your opinion, please put in the chat or let us know out loud. In the non-pro world, do sponsors have more or less oversight? Give me a more or less.
Define oversight. Oversight of the deliverables.
Yeah, what's happening, deliverables or
The
communication,
project,
what,
statement
I
of
feel
work,
like they're involved more or less.
looking at your finances, you know, looking at, you know, whatever, oversight of any sort.
Yeah, in different ways than a federal award would have oversight.
In different ways.
Yeah. Like more direct contact with the PI and not with organization, like representatives like OSB.
Yeah, there's a different relationship.
Exactly, yeah.
If the
Oh, that's
budget
true.
moves outside of participant support, it depends on the sponsor terms and conditions. I was gonna agree, it depends. Well, the old standard, right? It depends.
Yes, it's,
Some non-sponsors are totally hands-off once the check comes in, and others want updates and then detailed invoices.
yeah, we could go by sponsor type, for instance, if you wanted to break it down more and say industry, do you think they are more or less? And it can be, it depends, right? How much they're involved with that deliverable that's coming out maybe, or how much they want to be hearing the updates of the results coming out, because it might matter to their financial bottom line. Then in the private world, maybe like the one I said where they're like, we don't care, you have the money, just get it done. Yeah, Liza?
Our managed sponsors, like our foundations, do they require more or less from us
It
in
depends.
regards, you know, so it depends. I didn't know if there's ones,
Yeah.
you know, because they're managed sponsors, there's
I think it's-
similarities as far as their expectations from CSU.
So apparently they're getting away from the term managed sponsors anymore, but we do know that foundation does have some relationships that they have with certain sponsors. And that's the managed part, is that they manage that relationship. It's not necessarily then how the award goes and what is needed after the fact, because that's going to be very sponsor specific as far as what they're going to need.
And I think you would see in those situations, you're right, they're managing the relationship. We're billing to the foundation a lot of times if they have an account where they receive the funds. But our PI might still be quite actively involved with the sponsor on the science side. I think, yeah, the differentiation that's been brought up that it depends, right? Industry a lot of times is very involved, especially with the science because they're wanting a product. That's the reason they're here. where you see some of the foundations more hands-off, especially if it's more gift-like, and they're like, here's the money, go out and do great things with the animals in Western Colorado, like, and then publish your research and tell them that we supported it, and that's kind of it. And then other ones certainly have active plans where we're working, like, we're with the sponsor. We're working with them. We're having weekly, if not, at least monthly, but sometimes even weekly meetings. And so there's a lot of stuff going on the science side. But for us, it depends on sponsor programs, just how much they need from us. And yeah, it does depend. That's always the safe answer I see.
They don't use the word cooperative agreement.
Right.
Definitely.
It's very cooperative.
Yeah. I would say, yeah, there was a lot of less sponsor involvement on the foundation and association side. But it's like with our federal sponsors, you might have a lot of little hoops, especially compliance ones that you have to jump through, but they're hoops that we know about. Versus when it feels like it's going easy with a foundation, and then all of a sudden you get this big hoop to jump through that you've never seen before.
Right.
Yeah.
And kind of like you alluded to earlier, sometimes we ask for like an NCE, or we ask for approval for something, and the non-federal sponsor will be like, oh, yeah, that's fine. We don't care. You don't have to ask for that. Whereas with the federal sponsors, we typically know when we need to ask for in what situations. And so sometimes the sponsor is more lax in allowing for private approval requests with foundations, for instance, or industry.
Well, sometimes they'll throw a wrench in the middle of a project to you because we had that with an oil and gas industry. We had an agreement, and then all of a sudden they're like, we don't want any grad students on our site. And by the way, we also, if you're going to be on our site, which we had to be in order to perform the work, we need indemnification. And this was after we already had an award in place. So, we had people going out and obviously in contact with people on a regular basis at their site. And, this was a monkey wrench thrown into our plan because indemnification is a really big deal. So.
Was it a level of indemnification we could accept? Then you have to add in negotiation partway through.
Well, we couldn't have any grad students on it, which then also has other issues on there. And a lot of this came after the award was already in place, so the sponsor oversight can also be sponsor overstep, is what I'm going to call it, during the project, because they're like, this is our work, we're paying you for it, and we want to change, and then midstream about what it is that we want to do. How often does industry clauses stop negotiations completely? Liza, I'm going to tell you probably a lot of times. Indemnification is one of the main topics that we cannot accept in any sort of award. We happen to get this one particular one agreed upon because it was somewhat politically motivated, and I think that's the only reason why it went through.
There are different indemnification languages that you can use. Are they asking us to hold them completely harmless, or are we holding each other accountable, or totally not anyone? And so, or like Michael said, sometimes we'll try to ask to be silent on it. So we try to find a yes.
And there's alternative language in our standard agreement that we can propose, and a lot of times that will work. It's kind of a developing area because we cannot legally indemnify, which gets you out of some, because unless prohibited by law, you would indemnify us, and it depends on that situation. And then sometimes when we go to OGC, it depends on the project and the scope of work too, whether they will allow us to indemnify, because if it's a low risk area, it's one thing. If it's a structural engineer on something that could end up having high liability, we may not want to indemnify. So it depends on the project and scope of work as well. But if there's indemnification language that's questionable, we'll go talk to the lawyers to answer the OGC and see what they say and give us some actual feedback on what we could or couldn't accept. But But we typically start off striking it completely or just proposing our alternative language that is acceptable.
OGC is Office of General Counsel if you need it. I'm not saying go seek it out on your own. Yeah, and you mentioned that we have a template, a standard agreement, that if a foundation's out there and they don't know how to do an agreement, we don't want them going and creating their own and hiring a lawyer and making it more complicated. We are going to try to put out there like, oh, here, this tool may be acceptable for your use, and that's what our SOPs are for.
Yeah, it's nice to start with our agreement because then we know we can accept it as is, and any changes are easier to review versus starting with their agreement, which might be chock full of things we can't accept. And then it looks like we just murdered their contract and want them to change everything. So it's sometimes just easier to negotiate if we start on our own.
Yeah, and on the indemnification, Liza, just, that one went all the way to the president to be, approved, and risk management also had to be involved because of the high risk involved with it, so. And it's the only one I've ever seen in the entire time I've been here. But we've also saw one other that we had indemnification in a contract from the state of California Department of Transportation, which we could not accept. They would not get rid of the term, and the condition in their contract, so we had to step away.
Yeah, California likes indemnification language.
Yeah.
And we don't. Tricia, it's not on our website. If we have a sponsor that needs it, we can pull it and send it out.
We don't want those forward facing because we don't want people sharing out our contract and then having people making changes to them. So if you need something, or if you think you're going to be working with a potential sponsor that does not have their own contract, you can always suggest that CSU has one, and then OSP can send that to them.
Matter of fact, I need to send one today.
So we already talked a little bit about how there could be weird reporting. If you're used to the federal world of 90-day windows or 120-day, it might not be as such. This one was from, I can't remember what this one's from, but yeah, it had very specific language on if you're in this window, you might have to report annually, but within 30 days, or if you're not, then you have this other window. And so it was a little complicated to discern like which one do we have for that situation. Oh yeah, and so other reporting that we had to do, one of the reports requests that we have a headshot and no explanation why. So I was like, well, they really want to know, why do you need this? And they said, oh, because we want to support our grads and say, or put them on our website and say, this is who we sponsored this year. And so it was like, oh, okay, thank you for making that connection for me. Otherwise, I did not know, what are you going to do with their picture? Because some people don't like their picture out there, right? It could be a shorter period, like Michael talked about, being able to turn that stuff out quickly. Can we do it? If they say they want it within 15 days, is that actually possible? That's a lot of responsibility on. Yeah,
Some are due at the end and some are actually due before the end of the period as well. Some
Yeah.
reports.
pay
which-
attention.
Yeah, we gotta pay attention.
Okay, more terms and conditions. This one's grouped together because they go hand in hand.
You can't publish if you don't have rights to the intellectual property usually.
Yeah.
I would say typically we want to be able to publish because that's so important, because we're a research institution, and especially if there's graduate students on here, this might be key to them being able to get their PhD. So publication and at least having the right to use it for educational purposes, if not outright ownership, is always good. Currently, we are pretty flexible on giving the sponsor rights to use the data. We would prefer to own it, but that's in negotiations when we actually start talking to them who owns stuff.
Jan, you have the oil and gas situation that came up.
Yeah, the no grad students, it was that same one that we had to have the indemnification on. That they refused to allow students, and again, it was the whole risk thing, which we understood, but that also meant that the students that had previously been working on it couldn't then use it as part of their dissertation or their thesis. But then they also wanted first right of refusal on anything that we published also. So this one agreement ended up being quite cumbersome. And again, not all of this was always spelled out at the beginning of everything, but the publishing one was that they wanted to see anything that we were going to put out there, because They were afraid of the political fallout, of what we could potentially be putting out there. But again, we had to push back because if there were health risks or health effects, we could not be, we had to get that out there. We couldn't be, talked into not publishing that data. So, again, oil and gas, I'm not gonna mention the company.
Yeah, we want to be able to publish, like I said, and that's important. And so we don't mind if they review and suggest changes or review it so that they can protect any intellectual property. But in the end, we need the freedom to publish as we will without them making edits to our submissions to journals.
And it can also put us into an export control realm as well. When we start talking about getting rid of our IP and our publishing, basic research generally is exempt from any export controls language, generally. I'm putting that out there because we want free flow of thoughts and being able to share things. But as soon as we start putting any restrictions on our publishing and IP, that also then makes it a potential, if you're dealing especially with a foreign entity, et cetera, that it can put us into that export control realm as well. And secure and global research would have to get involved.
Next one feeds right into it.
Yeah, you don't always have agreements that make it mandatory that you present something, but because this was related to our young investigators going out and learning how to be good scientists, it was requiring that they actually present at a conference, and it had to be a conference of specifically those fields. So it was a good fellow program.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of the fellowship, well, not a lot, but you'll see some, especially foundation kind of stuff for the fellows. They want them to publish or present at certain places, or a number of submissions to journals. I've seen that. We need you to submit at least 3 articles for publication. Didn't have to get accepted, but they needed to be submitted, showing what they're doing with the money. And so sometimes that's in the state in the awards.
Yeah. So it's encouraging them. It's supporting them. That's the reason behind it. And then related to that oil and gas one, right? Like there might be social media terms and conditions that they want to work collaboratively with us. They want to make sure that our communication team is ready to go with them at the same time when they're going to hit that button and post it to the source or to their magazine.
Well, but there also sometimes we have to be aware that sometimes a business may want to manipulate the message. And it's very important to understand that obviously as a university, it's our responsibility to get the correct information out there.
It's usually positive, but you got to be careful.
Yes.
Integrity is one of our pillars, right?
Yes.
Important to our mission. We have 5 financial cards that we're going to bust through, but we've already done a lot of them because these tie closely together. So that was award management and acceptance, negotiation. And then a lot of these ideas can relate to invoicing and how we're getting paid. So from that pre-award to the post-award stage, all of it. Okay, what if we have funky payment types? What if they're sending us a hybrid option where it's here's some check, but also you're doing cost reimbursable. So it's partially fixed price, but partially reimbursable. Can our system do that? No, it's really complicated, right? So we prefer to make it less complicated. Try to get one payment type or form. What was this part about? Expense documentation within 6 weeks of submitting the signed agreement, right? So that's a tight turnaround time. Because what if you can't even sign the agreement within a week or a few weeks? What if it's, a peak season and you're trying to get 6 weeks out? All the parties might not be ready for that. Yep, we talked about random checks. You had a time when they sent a check and it was actually combining a payment from something for sponsor programs and something
Yeah. We had 3 entities involved. One was for OSP. The other 2 parts of the check were for service centers here on campus. They mixed them all together, and so we had no idea what part was what until we contacted the sponsor finally and asked them for the breakout, what this was intended for. It's always nice. I always ask the sponsors to make a note on the check or some kind of note of the payment they send in so we can easily identify where the money goes, but that's not always the case.
Oh, good. So they didn't have to redo the check.
No, we didn't have to redo the check. We kept it. It was a lot of money, but we did find out where it goes eventually. And those emails will go around. I'm sure many of y'all have seen them before. Is this for your unit? Is this for your area? Do you know what this money's for? Because CSU gets a lot of payments.
Yes, and CSU is big. So Shannon had one time when they sent it to the wrong address because they had another CSU address in there. And it ended up with athletics.
I think it was athletics. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times they think CSU is CSU and they have one address and they're just gonna keep using that. They don't care. You know, it's like, oh, this is in our payment system, so great, we don't have to make any changes. That's when those random checks end up at the cashier's office with them saying, with the blast out to everybody. So we've got a $25,000 check from, XYZ. Whose is it?
I think you'll also see that they have one point of contact in their payment system.
Yeah.
For CSU.
Yeah.
Like you're saying.
Yeah.
In that case, we might not want to change it because they're paying athletics on a monthly basis, and we don't want to
Potentially,
change it off for a one-time payment for us. So then we might have to ask them to mail it in a different form, or at least just be aware when it comes in, what's going on.
We talked about tax implications briefly, like if it's coming directly to the individual versus the institute as the entity. Or if it's being split, if they're giving maybe a stipend directly, instead of sending it through, like there are going to be tax implications on that, right? The PI, the grad, whoever's receiving it directly has to account for it when they're doing their annual taxes. And so they may ask for it not to come directly to them.
It's especially nice when you're funding, say, $5,000 to an undergraduate student and they're using all the expenses for their project. It goes right to them and they're buying supplies, they got taxed and stuff. If it comes to CSU, we hold an account for them, they charge against the account. We buy from our suppliers with tax-free typically, and so they don't, it's cheaper and easier, and it's just the right way to do it. But we need our people to understand that because it's nicer if the check comes to us.
A note here, if you're a contractor or consultant, then you would pay for use of that space, right? So if you're using university property and resources, but you're getting the money directly as a consultant, that's an issue.
There's a conflict.
Yeah. If you're using university funds, like that's why we have IDC, right? Incorporated into these to make sure that it's accounted for and that the university resources are being supported. Okay, and the spending restrictions. We had this one last time in pre-award also, but it was over here too. That they may be expecting to use the money exactly as is, or maybe it's like only specific categories. So you have to make sure that you aren't deviating at all. So deviation can also be a wide range. A spectrum of, yeah, you could do whatever you want with it as long as it's supporting that person. What does supporting that person mean? Can mean different things, or it could mean no deviation at all. So make sure you're reading your award to see what kind of freedoms do you have. We still have to adhere to university policy, right? We can't just go willy-nilly with it, and buy tons of stuff that normally university funds would not support. Oh yeah, maybe it's specific to a category instead of a percentage, versus a lot of our federal sponsors may use more of a percentage type of language. This language from above is from a theater grant that we received for Colorado Shakespeare Festival, because they go out and do this like high school thing, and it's like intervention with the high schoolers where you act out Shakespeare and then you redo the scene and be like, wow, it was really dramatic, Romeo and Juliet. Maybe we do it communicating, but anyway. So that's why they specifically said these funds are specifically for this use. It's not for Colorado Shakespeare Summer Festival. It is for this project that you are doing with the high school. But those two things wouldn't cross each other. So, okay, budget translation. They speak a different language, like we talked about. So here are just some examples of they may use one word when they mean something else. And this is a problem at invoicing when they're trying to match up our type of line items and codes to what the sponsor wants to see. When those actuals come in, so this is affecting our pre-award stage and post-award. Any other thoughts on this one?
Not really. It's just nice if we can attach as an exhibit our budget to whatever agreement is, so that we know what cost categories we're proposing.
Yep.
Versus if they just take it and give it a lump sum and don't append our budget, because then, like you said, there can be a little bit of different terminology here. If we provide our budget, at least we know what we said we're going to do and we're going to spend in these categories. And then we can customize the invoice if we have to match those those categories.
Yeah.
Which we prefer not to. Our standard is best.
Yeah, we don't want to reinvent it again and again. Communicate all the way down the award lifecycle line. Okay, foreign currency. So this was also talked about a little bit previously. We have other stuff to add. It's a currency calculator that I found online. To show like, yeah, even if it's a little bit off, it's off. It's different. Shannon talked about Canadian dollars. So if they're saying dollars, make sure they're talking about the same dollars that you're thinking about.
Now, this is just where it's really nice to go check RPS and see what's been received, so you can make sure we're matching up with what we're staying pretty good on track with the conversion.
I'd like to give a thank you to Nan for giving me some of those examples for today. Okay. Let's see. So let's see how fast we can do these. Mitigating delays. Put in the chat if you can think of other delays, but the one that comes up, I think the most, is a surprise award, because they're building their relationships, they're out there, they're talking at a conference, and then all of a sudden, like we said, money arrives, and you're like, what is this? Great, what do we do now? Or put in the chat, why do you think surprise awards happen? That's one example I had, from someone who came back from an event. But these associations, foundations, nonprofits, yes, they are trying to figure out how to best use their money, and they're building relationships with us. So it's helpful for them and it's helpful for our teams. So we want to encourage it, but we also need to make sure we're protecting the university and that we're covering all of our costs, right? If budget numbers are being asked for, right? If they're talking in email or on the phone, they said, oh, just send me a rough number. Let's make sure that we loop in all the parties, right? Your department administrators and your OSP team, so that everything is accounted for appropriately and that we send them an accurate number. We need to make sure that stuff is in quality, that a proposal is being put together, that it's not just hiding somewhere on someone's desktop.
It's not just budget, it's also any CSU resources. If they start talking about using our resources or committing our resources to anything, sponsor programs needs to be involved as well. So budget, resources, students, anything.
And this could add several weeks of delay if we can't get things set up. If we can't get you a 5:30, right? Okay, the last few common delays that we thought of.
I think it's good. I mean, yeah, more approvals. If there's language we have to run by, common delays. I see, yeah, if there's language or we have to go talk to securing global research. If there's certain insurance requirements, we might have to check with risk management and make sure that we can comply with all that. Had one recently that had us operating on potentially operating on foreign bases, or US bases in foreign countries. And if it's in a conflict area, the insurance requirements are a lot steeper there. Who's covered, how much coverage they have. We have to go check that kind of thing out. A lot of times the back and forth with a sponsor there, they might have to go get their lawyer involved to review a contract change versus just doing it themselves. And in that case, that slows stuff down. And when you're dealing with Wyoming, their attorney general or their attorney general's delegate has to sign agreements. So that always takes a lot longer because they have to run it up the chain to extra levels compared to here. And so there's always unexpected delays. So planning extra time is a good thing.
Yeah. Make sure you have your approvals in place. So we talked about at the pre-award session that some of the things may not need to be finalized by the submission of proposal, but they for sure need to be done by the time we're going to set up a award and give a 5-3 out. So the sooner they're done, the better, right? If we can get them done in proposal, great. Or if your conflict of interest expires during that time period, like get it done as quickly as you can. So you're not worrying about an IDC waiver when the award has just arrived, or cost share and lining up that you have the appropriate back funding for supporting the share. Yep, I think those are the top 3 approvals that I'm thinking of. You talked about export. Any other things? Okay, do you have a thought?
No, I just bottom line. What are we talking about?
Good communication,
Good communication, doing things early,
sharing information.
looping in the appropriate people when they should be looped in. And again, we may be seeing a lot more of these because we need to diversify potentially. You know, so we may be seeing these and people just need to be aware that there could be some higher risks. There could be some high reward, but we really need to make sure that we are going through the process just like we do with a federal, with our federal sponsors, that there aren't any shortcuts necessarily. And we need to be dotting those I's and crossing those T's, and we need to be getting that information out to our PIs. And before they start talking to all these guys.
Yeah, so you have OSP for support, you have industry and foundation relations. We talked about Pivot last time as a good resource for non-federal. We have our Ramrun community for the listserv or the monthly discussion. So if something comes up after this and you want to talk about it or share a unique example, please bring it to that. We'd love to hear more of these.
I think, yeah, as we get connected to the foundations and industry and stuff, those are some very valuable relationships. I mean, obviously still most of our money comes from the federal government, but there's a lot of really good opportunities out there. I know recently in OSP, we've had a couple of different sponsors from industry that have been interested in working with CSU that we've given them connections to other faculty or other units. So as they work with us, they might work with us more if we're successful and have a good relationship, and we can grow those. And that's a really important thing, not just for advancement, but for just general funding for our PIs.
And if we do this well, right? I mean, if it gets to award and because none of these things happen to begin with, and then it takes months for an award to get established, what is the chances that that business or that sponsor or that foundation or that society or state, why would they work with us again? So we want to establish these relationships well to begin with. That's really the main point that we want to get out to everybody.
Thank you for participating today and joining us for lunch. Bye.
Bye.